I'm Walter Cronkite. Today, the 20th century presents its regular feature, Man of the Month.
This month, while diplomats traveled and statesmen pondered, a frail man with a wispy beard in the drab, dug-in city of Hanoi held many of the answers to President Johnson's worldwide peace offensive. His name was Nguyen Sinh Cung when he was born 75 years ago. Today, he is Ho Chi Minh, the president of North Vietnam. Hanoi, August 1945. The man who calls himself Ho Chi Minh, he who enlightens, is greeted by delirious crowds when he arrives with his guerrilla forces after Japan's defeat. Smaller crowds greet the French, returning to their colony. Ho proclaims Vietnam's independence in September 1945. The French treat him as the head of an independent state. Years before, this same man left his homeland, became a sailor, a pastry chef in London, a photo retoucher in France, and rented a dress suit and derby hat to petition President Wilson at Versailles in 1919. Ho pleaded for independence for Vietnam. No one listened to him except the French communists. He became a founding member of their party in 1920. Then began his long march to power. Moscow, New York, Berlin, prisons in Hong Kong and China were his way stations. He assumed a dozen different names as he rose in the hierarchy of world communism, but he never lost sight of his main goal, Vietnamese independence. In the summer of 1946, in Napoleon's castle at Fontainebleau, he seeks to obtain from the French full independence for his country. Paris treats the former photo retoucher with full honors, but behind the glittering exteriors lurk the realities of post-war France. A weak government at home and strongly entrenched colonial interests overseas. Until the end, Ho hopes for an agreement. Last-minute talks with French Overseas Minister Marius Moutet fail. The handshake is that of men about to enter the ring. A man who covered the story in Hanoi, today the New Yorker magazine's correspondent in South Vietnam and author of the book, The Lost Revolution, Robert Chaplin.
You could say that this was the beginning of what I have described as one of the many lost opportunities in Indochina and Vietnam to force the French into a stronger, more liberal position so that a decent alternative to communism might have been created earlier, or perhaps Ho might have been pre-Tito-fied, if you want to put it that way. This opportunity obtained until certainly from the end of 1945 until the Indochina War broke out in November, December 1946. But there was a year there during which the French could have certainly tried harder. It was their own fault that they didn't. And myself, I blame the collapse of those negotiations primarily on the French, on the conservative element among the French.
November 1946. French guns hit the port of Haiphong. A few days later, Ho's guerrillas in turn attack the French. Ho goes into the jungle. The Indochina War is on, and it is to last 8 blood-filled years. Ho's troops, called the Viet Minh, are at first equipped with a medley of old French and Japanese weapons supplemented by American arms from World War II. Communist weapons will come later. Ho's headquarters is deep in the jungle. There, he and his most trusted associates forge their plans. Vo Nguyen Giap, the guerrilla expert, Trong Chin, the Communist Party secretary, Ho Chi Minh, the president who calls himself Uncle Ho, and Pham Van Dong, a nobleman by birth, later Ho's prime minister. Only in 1950, after Red Chinese troops arrive on Vietnam's borders, does Ho have any direct contact with another communist state. His arguments are nationalistic. He stresses that the fatherland must be freed of the foreigners, the French. A daily worker editor who has since quit the American Communist Party interviewed Ho in the jungle in 1953. Joseph Sterobin, today an expert in communist studies at Columbia University.
Well, I wanted to get from him under what circumstances did he think France would give up or some negotiation could take place with France. I wanted to put the thing the other way around. How is this war going to end? He replied very abruptly, when they are beaten. Well, I had come prepared for some kind of insight into the possibilities of negotiation. He was very firm on the notion that they would have to be beaten. Then I asked him about American help to France. At that time, some of the bombers that were hitting us in the jungles during the day were of American make. His attitude was, the more stuff you send to the French, the more we will capture and the stronger we will become. One of the points he made was, well, communism hasn't gone over in the Anglo-Saxon countries, which I thought was rather strange. Only a man with Western experience could say that, but only a man with a certain liberalism in his communism would suggest at that particular moment that maybe communism isn't the answer to every people. And then Ho began to talk about the days of their contact with Americans, which was, of course, in 43, 44, and 45, when the American OSS, as part of the united war effort against Japan, made contact with the Vietnamese guerrillas. He seemed to be searching for the name of the one American with whom he had had a great deal to do. And I remember it as Holland. He himself stumbled on that. He tried to remember Hall something or other. I've since learned that it was Hallowell that he had contact with.
Colonel Paul J. Hallowell, former OSS man, now a Miami lawyer.
When he came up and asked for arms, there were certain questions we usually asked, and one question that I asked him, and I asked him every time, was, who was he going to shoot? And he said he was going to shoot Japanese, which was fine, and we would ask the question, well, what about the French? And to give the devil his due, he would never commit that he would not use the arms against the French at some point. Had he made that commitment, he possibly might have gotten more arms than he did.
When American arms do go to Indochina, it is 1950, after Korea, and they go to the French. Ho and his cabinet must hide from roving bombers in a deep mine shaft. The French know that the enemy hides below them in the jungle. But Ho's fighters have in their favor their mastery of the art of guerrilla warfare, and above all, their fanaticism. In a final attempt to trap the elusive Viet Minh, the French decide to tempt Ho's forces to fight in the open. As bait, they offer the elite of the French troops in Indochina in an isolated valley called Seat of the Border County Administration. In Vietnamese, Bien Bien Phu. Spurred on by Ho, the Viet Minh forces accept the French challenge. The experts had predicted that no one could drag artillery pieces and tens of thousands of shells through roadless jungles and across swollen rivers. The Viet Minh take the French position after 56 days of continuous assault. As the battle unfolds, Ho sends a message to his troops. The enemy will struggle with all his might. We must therefore double our efforts and be resolved to win total victory. Dien Bien Phu has fallen, and the French now are ready to talk. They agree to a peace conference in Geneva, May 1954. CBS News correspondent Alexander Kendrick was there.
What I remember about the Geneva 1954 conference is the bright sunshine, the British Union Jack and the Communist Chinese Star flying side by side from the same lakefront hotel, John Foster Dulles' refusal to shake hands with Zhou Enlai at a diplomatic reception. There were two conferences at Geneva. First, the one on Korea, which got nowhere, and then the one on Indochina. Dulles left before the second one even began, and the United States became only an observer and didn't sign the final agreement. Molotov, the Soviet foreign minister, made the Viet Minh accept the 17th parallel as the ceasefire line, even though it meant giving up territory to the south.
The Geneva agreements leave the victorious Ho Chi Minh in control of North Vietnam. The weak, newly independent state of South Vietnam survives with American support. 750,000 North Vietnamese flee to the south. Reunification elections to be held by July 1956 under the terms of the Geneva Accords never materialize. Each side will accuse the other of breaking the accords first. When Ho calls for the liberation of the South, black-garbed militia loyal to Ho will spread guerrilla warfare below the 17th parallel. At home, the backbone of his regime is the feared goose-stepping People's Army. To rebuild the North's shattered economy, Ho tries harsh collectivization measures copied from Red China. In 1956, his troops suppress a peasant revolt in his own home province. Ho blames pro-Chinese leaders for the brutal collectivization. For public consumption, Ho himself works on a primitive water wheel.